The evening had the kind of stillness that only suburbs could conjure. Neatly trimmed lawns, kids' bikes left on sidewalks, and the faint hum of lawnmowers fading as the sun dipped behind the houses. I was halfway through changing the oil in my truck when I noticed the rumble of engines breaking that quiet. Two black SUVs rolled into my driveway with the kind of slow confidence that screamed authority. The vehicles stopped in perfect sync, side by side, blocking my truck from the street. Two men stepped out. Both wore dark tactical pants and combat boots, their black shirts neatly tucked in under fake-looking bulletproof vests that read Community Enforcement Division. My first instinct was to laugh, but their body language stopped me. They were trying too hard, squared shoulders, mirrored sunglasses, hands resting on what looked like holstered tasers. The taller one barked, "Sir, step away from the vehicle." I froze, rag still in my hand. "Can I help you?" He glanced at a clipboard, pretending to read something. "We have orders from the HOA board. You're being placed under arrest for violating neighborhood security ordinances and trespassing on HOA property." I let the words hang in the air for a moment, just long enough to see if he'd realize how ridiculous they sounded. "Trespassing," I repeated slowly on my own driveway. Behind them, a familiar figure strutted up the sidewalk. Mrs. Langford, the self-proclaimed president of the HOA. She was the kind of woman who treated her title like a royal crown. Perfectly ironed blouse, pearls glinting in the evening light, and that smug little smirk that always followed her wherever she went. "I told you this was going to happen, Mr. Cross," she said, her voice sugary and sharp at once. "You can't just ignore HOA rules. This community has standards." I wiped my hands on the rag, suppressing a chuckle. "Standards?" I gestured to the two men. "You mean like hiring mall cops to play FBI in my driveway?" Her smirk faltered, just for a second. "They are licensed enforcement officers," she snapped. "The board voted to authorize them for compliance operations." "Compliance operations," I repeated. "What is this, a military occupation?" The shorter officer stepped forward, gripping his fake badge. "Sir, if you continue resisting, we'll have no choice but to detain you." I stared at him. The badge was plastic, probably ordered from some online uniform shop. The font was wrong, the emblem crooked. My eyes drifted to his radio, which was actually a cheap walkie-talkie with no visible channel number. "Tell you what," I said calmly, "before anyone gets detained, why don't you tell me what department you're from?" He hesitated, eyes flicking to his partner. "Community Enforcement Division, Region Region what?" I asked, stepping closer. "Because I'm the chief of police for this city, and I've never heard of a community enforcement division in my jurisdiction." That landed like a hammer. Mrs. Langford's expression froze, the color draining from her cheeks. The shorter man's jaw tensed, and the taller one shifted uneasily on his feet. "You're lying," Mrs. Langford said finally, her voice rising an octave. "If you were really the chief, we'd know about it. We have background checks on every homeowner here." I sighed, reaching for my belt. From under my flannel shirt, I pulled out my real badge, polished silver, official seal gleaming in the fading sunlight. I held it up just long enough for the reflection to flash across their faces. "Daniel Cross, City Police Department, chief for the last 3 years." I looked directly at her. "Now, I'd love to know why you're sending fake cops onto private property to arrest me for trespassing on land I own." For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt thick, the kind of silence that follows a car crash or a bad punchline. The shorter man finally found his voice. "Ma'am, maybe we should—" "No," Mrs. Langford snapped, her voice trembling with panic. "He's just trying to scare us. This property is still under HOA jurisdiction. I have the maps." "You mean the outdated maps from 2008? I interrupted. "The ones that don't show the city's annexation line that runs right through your precious clubhouse." Her mouth opened, then closed. She hadn't expected me to know that. I took a step closer, my tone firm but controlled. This neighborhood stopped being private HOA property 6 years ago. The city incorporated it. Your rules are advisory, not enforceable, which means your little security force here just committed impersonation of law enforcement, a felony. The taller fake officer finally spoke, his confidence crumbling. We were told this was a civil matter. We didn't what? I cut in. Didn't think to check the law before slapping on fake badges and threatening someone with arrest. Mrs. Langford started to stammer, her voice breaking. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood. You've been parking your truck outside the lines, and your renovation noise is perfectly legal since I'm remodeling my own home, and for the record, I already approved the permits with the city planning office, I said sharply. But you wouldn't know that, because you still think you run a little kingdom here. The shorter man looked at me helplessly. Sir, what do you want us to do? I pointed toward the SUV. Start by getting those unmarked vehicles off my property before I call dispatch and have a real patrol unit take you in for questioning. He nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Mrs. Langford's voice broke into a shrill protest. You can't do that. You can't call the police on HOA enforcement. I am the police, I said quietly. Her face went pale, her confidence finally cracking. The taller man climbed back into the SUV, the other following without argument. The engine started, the vehicles reversing out of my driveway with the same precision they'd arrived with. But this time, there was no swagger. Just silence. Mrs. Langford stood frozen, clutching a clipboard like it could protect her. I took a deep breath, stepping closer until I was just a few feet away. Listen carefully, Karen, I said, my voice low but calm. I don't care about your HOA meetings or your bylaws, but if you ever send anyone onto my property pretending to be law enforcement again, I will personally see to it that you're charged with conspiracy to impersonate an officer, and trust me, that carries real jail time. Her lip trembled. You can't talk to me like that. I smiled faintly. I just did. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sun had disappeared completely, leaving the street bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a sprinkler clicked on. Mrs. Langford finally turned and stormed back toward her car, muttering something about calling her lawyer. The SUV disappeared down the street, their taillights fading into the dusk. I leaned against my truck, exhaling slowly. My pulse had finally started to settle, though my mind was still racing. Fake cops, HOA arrests, all because I parked my truck a few inches too far to the left. I glanced up at the darkening sky, shaking my head. Suburbia. I muttered under my breath, never a dull moment. Then I went back to changing my oil, because, at the end of the day, I had bigger things to worry about than an overzealous HOA president and her dollar store deputies. But something told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Would you like me to continue with Scene 2 in the same expanded cinematic storytelling style? Around 1,000 words, too. Blue and red lights painted the entire street in flashes of color. Bouncing off windows and polished SUV like a silent storm had descended on the neighborhood. The rhythmic hum of police radios filled the night, mingling with the murmurs of curious neighbors peeking from behind curtains. What had been a quiet suburban block an hour ago now looked like the aftermath of a sting operation, because that's exactly what it was. I stood near the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, watching as two of my officers cuffed the Community Enforcement Division, imposters, and guided them to the curb. Their fake tactical vests were stripped off, revealing plain black t-shirts underneath. The tall one was staring blankly at the ground. The shorter one was shaking his head, muttering under his breath. Mrs. Langford wasn't faring much better. She sat rigidly on a lawn chair one of my officers had brought out for her, still dressed in her prim white blouse and pearls, now speckled with sweat under the flashing lights. Her composure was gone. The woman who'd strutted onto my property like a general an hour ago now looked small, frightened, even. Chief Cross, one of my sergeants called, holding a clipboard. You were right. These guys aren't licensed under any state security agency. No registration, No credentials, nothing. Their company name doesn't even exist in the state database. I nodded slowly. What about the vehicles? Unregistered, temporary plates all expired. Looks like they tried to scrub the VN too. I exhaled, running a hand over my face. Get photos of everything. We'll impound both SUV. I want to know where they got their gear, who they're working for, and how much they were paid. The sergeant nodded and went back to work. Across the street, a small crowd of residents had gathered, the usual mix of nosy neighbors and smartphone journalists, filming the flashing lights as if it were reality TV. Mrs. Langford's voice broke through the noise. "This isn't necessary," she shouted. "You're making a scene. This is a private matter between me and the HOA board." I turned toward her. "Private matter? You hired armed imposters to come to my house pretending to be police. That stopped being private the moment they stepped onto my driveway." "They're not armed," she protested. I gestured toward the evidence table my officers had set up, a folding card table with 2 black pistols laid out on it. "You mean those?" She froze. "They're BB guns, Chief. My sergeant confirmed, but realistic enough to fool anyone from a distance." I nodded grimly. "Impersonation of an officer, unlawful detainment attempt, and possession of replica weapons during a crime. That's 3 felonies right there, Mrs. Langford's jaw dropped. "You can't arrest me for that. I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted to enforce community rules." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Karen, you didn't just break community rules. You broke the law. You impersonated a government function by authorizing these men to perform arrests, which is something only law enforcement can do. You crossed a line." Her eyes darted between me and the 2 men sitting in cuffs. "They told me they were professionals. They said they had the right permits." I sighed. "And you didn't think to check?" Her mouth trembled. "I was trying to protect the neighborhood. You're the one who keeps ignoring our HOA letters. You park your truck outside the lines. You're building a fence that doesn't match the color code. And your renovation noise violates our guidelines. We're just trying to keep order." I looked around at the dozen officers processing her fake enforcers, the flashing lights, the cameras recording from across the street. "This is what order looks like to you." She said nothing. "Do you even realize?" I continued that this entire subdivision stopped being under HOA jurisdiction 6 years ago. The city annexed it. You've been operating under dead bylaws, enforcing rules that legally don't exist. Her eyes widened. "That's not possible. I have documents from before annexation." I interrupted. "The city zoning office has the updated maps. The HOA has no legal power here. You've been sending out fake violation notices for years, collecting illegal fees, and now hiring unlicensed security to arrest people." Her face drained of color. For the first time that night, she didn't look defiant, she looked lost. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. I crouched slightly so I was eye level with her. "You meant well, I get that. You wanted control, but good intentions don't excuse bad decisions. You could have gotten someone killed tonight." One of the fake officers lifted his head from the curb, his voice hoarse. "We didn't know he was the chief, man. She told us he was some ex-con who refused to follow HOA regulations." My eyes flicked back to her. "You told them that?" She stammered. I might have exaggerated." I straightened up. "You told armed imposters that the chief of police was a criminal. You're lucky this ended with handcuffs and not gunfire." Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't in the mood for sympathy. I'd seen too many people try to twist the law for personal vendettas. Power in the wrong hands was always dangerous, whether it came from a badge or a homeowner's board title. "Chief," the sergeant said, handing me a small notebook. "Found this in one of the SUV. It's a job ledger. Mrs. Langford's name appears 3 times. Looks like she's been using them for other enforcement calls, too." I flipped through the pages. There were addresses, dates, notes like warned resident for unapproved paint color, an issued HOA citation for loud pets, each one signed off by the same bogus company name, CED. Tactical services. I looked up at her. You've been using these guys for months. She buried her face in her hands. They told me it was legal. I handed the notebook to my sergeant. Book her for conspiracy and fraudulent impersonation. We'll let the DA sort out the rest. The sergeant nodded, signaling 2 officers over. As they read her rights, Mrs. Langford's voice broke completely. Please, Daniel, we're neighbors, don't do this. I looked at her one last time, my expression unreadable. You should have thought about that before you weaponized fake cops against me or anyone else. They led her to the cruiser, her pearl necklace glinting under the flashing lights. The crowd murmured as the door closed behind her, the sound of the lock echoing faintly. I stood in silence for a long while after the cruisers pulled away. The air smelled faintly of hot rubber and damp asphalt. Across the street, porch lights flicked on as neighbors whispered through the dark. Some looked relieved, some looked afraid. One of my younger officers approached quietly. "Hell of a night, sir." "Yeah," I said, exhaling slowly. Suburban drama turns into a full-blown felony case. Guess there's a first for everything. He nodded. What do we do with the HOA now? I looked down the street, where the perfectly manicured lawns and matching mailboxes stretched into the distance. A monument to rules, control, and the illusion of order. The HOA finished. I said finally, the city will shut down what's left of their board after this mess. It's over. But deep down, I wasn't sure it ever really would be. Power doesn't just disappear, it shifts. And in neighborhoods like this, there's always someone waiting to grab it. I climbed back into my truck, the same one Mrs. Langford had complained about endlessly, and started the engine. The last of the flashing lights faded in my rear-view mirror as I pulled away from the curb. The night was quiet again, but it felt different now, heavier somehow. I glanced at the badge sitting on the passenger seat, its silver edges catching the faint glow of the dashboard. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then I smiled faintly and muttered under my breath, next time, maybe they'll think twice before trying to arrest the chief. And with that, I drove home through the stillness of a neighborhood that had finally learned what real law looked like.